It was the kind of night that made you question why you ever took up trucking. The darkness had swallowed the landscape whole, with nothing but the high beams of my Kenworth W90 cutting through the black void of Highway 76. The radio had long gone silent, and the only sounds were the low hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of static from the CB radio. I'd been on the road for over 12 hours and was running on fumes, both in the truck and in my own system. But I had a deadline to meet, and there was no stopping now. The job had taken me across some pretty desolate highways in my time, but Highway 76 was different. It cut through the middle of nowhere, running parallel to some forgotten mountain range with no towns or gas stations in sight for hundreds of miles. The road was notorious among truckers. They called it the loneliest road, and after hours of driving without so much as seeing another set of headlights, I understood why. I had been hauling a shipment of construction materials from Denver to Sacramento, and I figured I'd push through the night and make it to the next truck stop before dawn. But as the clock on the dashboard ticked past midnight, I began to feel the weight of exhaustion settle into my bones. My eyes grew heavy, and I caught myself nodding off more than once. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe the way the headlights bounced off the asphalt, creating strange shadows. But as I rounded a curve in the road, something appeared in the distance. A pair of taillights, glowing red like the eyes of some beast lurking in the dark. My heart leapt in my chest. Another truck, out here. On this dead stretch of road, I leaned forward, squinting to get a better look. The truck ahead was moving slowly, far too slowly for this kind of road. I eased off the accelerator, giving myself some distance, but as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. The taillights looked strange, faded almost, like they weren't really there. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as I pulled alongside the truck. It was an old rig, rusted and beaten up. The kind of truck you'd expect to see in a junkyard, not out here on the open road. The paint was chipped and peeling, and the trailer it was hauling looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in decades. But that wasn't the strangest part. There was no driver. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and glanced again. No driver. The cab was empty, the seat covered in a layer of dust so thick it looked like no one had been in there for years. And yet, the truck kept moving slowly, steadily, as if guided by some unseen force. A chill ran down my spine. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator, desperate to put some distance between myself and that thing. My Kenworth roared to life, speeding down the highway, but no matter how fast I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that the truck was still behind me, that it was following me. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time had started to blur together in my exhaustion, fueled haze. My eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those eerie taillights glowing in the darkness behind me. But there was nothing. The road was empty. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. It must have been my mind playing tricks on me. I was tired, after all, and this road had a way of messing with your head. I tried to convince myself that what I saw wasn't real. Before I could respond, the radio went silent again, leaving only the faint hiss of static. I set the receiver down, my hands shaking. I didn't want to believe what I had just heard, but something deep inside me knew it was true. That truck wasn't just some abandoned rig. It was something else. Something that didn't belong on the road, or anywhere else, for that matter. The next few hours passed in a blur of exhaustion and paranoia. Every shadow on the road seemed to move, and every flicker of light had me on edge. I just wanted to reach the truck stop, to get off this cursed highway and put as much distance between myself and that ghost truck as possible. Finally, just as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I saw it, the neon sign of a truck stop, glowing like a beacon of salvation. I pulled off the highway, my tires crunching on the gravel lot as I parked the rig. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs weak and trembling from the long haul. Inside, the truck stop was quiet, with only a handful of drivers sitting at the counter, nursing cups of coffee. I grabbed a seat and ordered a coffee of my own, hoping the caffeine would help shake off the lingering unease. As I sat there, staring into my cup, an old-timer at the counter turned to me, his weathered face creased with age and experience. "You look like you've seen a ghost, son." I forced a chuckle, but it came out hollow. "You could say that." The old man nodded slowly, as if he understood more than I was letting on. "Let me guess, you were driving Highway 76. My heart skipped a beat. "Yeah, how'd you know?" He leaned back in his seat, lighting a cigarette. "Been driven these roads for over 40 years. I've heard the stories. Hell, I've seen it myself. The truck?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, blowing out a cloud of smoke. "The phantom trucker, they call it. Shows up every now and then, usually on nights like this. No one knows where it came from or why it's out there. Some say it's the ghost of a driver who died on the road, still trying to finish his last haul. Others say it's something darker, something that's been around a lot longer than trucks and highways." I swallowed hard, the coffee in my stomach turning to lead. "What happens if you see it?" The old man shrugged. "Most people just keep driving. They say if you don't look back, it won't follow you. But if you do, well, some folks don't make it to the next stop." I didn't know what to say. The idea that I had come that close to something so unnatural, so otherworldly, made my skin crawl. The old man finished his cigarette and stood up, tossing a few bills on the counter. "Take my advice, kid. Stay off Highway 76, especially at night. There are things out there that don't belong in our world." I nodded numbly as he walked out of the truck stop, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I never drove Highway 76 again after that night. I didn't care if it added hours to my trip or cost me a few extra bucks in gas. It wasn't worth the risk. Because I knew deep down that the phantom trucker was still out there, roaming the loneliest road, looking for someone else to follow, and I wasn't about to be his next target. Years have passed since that night, but the memory of the phantom trucker still haunts me. Sometimes, when I'm driving late at night, I think I catch a glimpse of those eerie taillights in the distance, flickering in the dark. And every time, I grip the wheel a little tighter, my heart racing in my chest. Because I know that out there, on some forgotten stretch of highway, the phantom trucker is still waiting. And one day, he might find me again. They call Route 81 the highway of broken dreams, though you won't find that name on any map. It's not the road itself that's dangerous, it's the stories that come from it. Stories no one can quite explain, stories of drivers who went out one night and never returned, or came back too scarred to ever drive again. I'd been a trucker for over a decade, and I'd heard all the tales. Most of us chalked it up to road, weary hallucinations, or the kind of tall tales truckers pass around to keep themselves awake on long hauls. But I wasn't the kind of guy to scare easily. I'd logged thousands of miles across every kind of road you can imagine. I figured I'd seen it all, until the night Route 81 nearly ended my career, and my life. It was a typical haul from Ohio to Tennessee, a shipment of auto parts that needed to be there by morning. I'd been driving for about 8 hours already, and the highway was unusually empty, even for a Sunday night. The GPS had me taking Route 81 for a big stretch of the trip. It was a shortcut through the hills and valleys, winding but faster than sticking to the interstate. As the last bit of daylight disappeared behind the mountains, I flipped on my high beams, leaned back in the seat, and settled in for what I expected to be an uneventful few hours. The radio played soft country tunes, and the hum of the engine was almost soothing. That's when I noticed the first odd thing. The truck's headlights picked up a small black shape darting across the road up ahead. It was fast, barely more than a blur, but it was enough to get my pulse going. A deer, I thought, or maybe a stray dog. But there was something off about the way it moved. Too fast, too smooth, and it had been so low to the ground. I slowed down, scanning the side of the road. Nothing, just the endless stretch of asphalt and the dense trees lining the route. Shaking my head, I pushed the thought away. Long hauls at night made your eyes play tricks on you. That's all it was, an hour passed. I hadn't seen another vehicle since I'd turned onto Route 81, not even a pair of distant taillights. Just miles and miles of road with no sign of life. The isolation started to creep in, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I'd driven lonely roads before, but this one was different. It was too quiet. The kind of silence that pressed in on you, made you feel like you were the only living thing for miles. I checked the clock on the dash. 2:15 a.m. If I kept a good pace, I'd make it to the next truck stop by 4 o'clock. Suddenly, the CB radio crackled to life. I jumped, the unexpected sound cutting through the stillness like a gunshot. I hadn't heard a peep on the CB all night. Breaker 19, anyone out there? The voice was faint, distant, like it was coming through a tunnel. I grabbed the receiver, grateful for some human contact. Yeah, this is Long Haul Lou. Who's on the line? There was a pause, then a burst of static. You heading down Route 81, Lou? A cold chill ran down my spine. How did they know? I hadn't mentioned my location. Yeah. Who is this? Another pause, longer this time. You need to be careful, Lou. That road's not safe. There's something out there. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. What are you talking about? The radio went silent. I waited, holding the receiver in a death grip, but there was nothing but static. I set it down, my hands shaking. I tried to brush it off as some prank, but my nerves were on edge now. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see something following me, but the road behind was just as empty as the road ahead. Another hour passed, and I'd almost convinced myself that the weird radio message was just some joker messing around when I saw it. Up ahead, barely visible in the faint glow of my headlights, there was something on the road. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker, a figure walking along the shoulder, hunched over and moving slow. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't walking, it was crawling. My heart pounded in my chest as I eased off the gas. The figure was human, or at least it looked human, but it moved in this strange, jerky way, like its limbs didn't quite work right. It was dragging itself along the ground, its arms stretched out in front, pulling its body inch by inch. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I didn't want to stop. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, to leave that thing behind and not look back. But what if it was someone in trouble? What if they needed help? Against my better judgment, I slowed down, bringing the truck to a stop a few feet away from the crawling figure. My headlights bathed it in a sickly yellow light, and that's when I saw it up close. It wasn't human. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over bones that jutted out at odd angles. Its eyes were too big for its face, wide and bulging, glowing faintly in the dark. And its mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile, rows of sharp, pointed teeth gleaming in the light. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. It was like something out of a nightmare, something that shouldn't exist. Then it moved. With a speed that defied its earlier sluggishness, the thing lunged toward the truck, its long arms reaching for the cab. I slammed my foot on the gas, the tires screeching as the truck lurched forward. The creature let out a high-pitched shriek, a sound that rattled through the cab and sent a jolt of terror straight to my core. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My hands were white, knuckled on the wheel as I sped down the highway, the engine roaring as I pushed the truck as fast as it would go. The shriek echoed in my ears, even after I was miles down the road. It took me a while to realize I was holding my breath. I exhaled shakily, my heart still hammering in my chest. What the hell was that thing? Some kind of animal? A person with some horrible deformity, but deep down, I knew it wasn't anything natural. Whatever that thing was, it didn't belong in this world. I didn't stop again until I reached the next truck stop. It was a run-down little place, just a few pumps and a diner, but it felt like a sanctuary after what I'd just been through. I parked the rig, climbed out of the cab, and leaned against the hood, trying to steady my breathing. Inside the diner, a few truckers sat at the counter, their faces lit by the dull glow of the overhead lights. I took a seat and ordered a coffee, my hands still trembling. The waitress, an older woman with a kind smile, placed the mug in front of me. "You okay, hon? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed, but it came out as more of a nervous chuckle. Something like that. The guy sitting next to me, a burly trucker with a grizzled beard, glanced over. "You come down Route 81. I nodded. He let out a low whistle. "You see anything strange?" My mouth went dry. "Yeah. Something crawling on the road. It looked like a person, but it wasn't." The trucker exchanged a glance with the waitress, then looked back at me. "You're not the first. There's been stories about that stretch of road for years. Some folks say it's haunted. Others say it's something else, something older. I echoed. He shrugged. "Some kind of creature. Lives out there in the hills, only comes out at night. Folks around here call it the night crawler." I swallowed hard, the memory of that thing's twisted smile flashing in my mind. "What does it want?" The trucker shook his head. "Nobody knows. But if you see it, the best thing you can do is keep driving and don't look back." I sat there in stunned silence, my coffee growing cold in front of me. Part of me wanted to believe it was just a tall tale, something the locals told to spook outsiders. But I'd seen it with my own eyes, and I knew that whatever was out there on Route 81, it was real. I finished my coffee, left a tip on the counter, and headed back to the truck. As I climbed into the cab, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I scanned the dark lot, but there was nothing there, just the wind rustling through the trees. But as I pulled out onto the highway, I couldn't help glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those glowing eyes staring back at me. I never drove Route 81 again. And every time I hit the road at night, I keep my eyes peeled for anything crawling along the shoulder, just in case the night crawler decides to show itself again. It was a little after midnight when I hit the open road, a long stretch of highway with nothing but the sound of my 18-wheeler's engine to keep me company. I'd been hauling freight from Michigan to Texas for the past 4 days, and I was in the final leg of the journey. The night was heavy, the kind of stillness that only comes in the deep hours between dusk and dawn, and the highway was eerily quiet. The moon was obscured by thick clouds, and the darkness felt like it was swallowing the road whole. This wasn't my first time on a night haul, but something about this drive felt off. I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my gut as soon as I merged onto this particular stretch of highway. I told myself it was just exhaustion. I'd been driving for hours, and my eyes were heavy. I downed 2 cups of black coffee before leaving the last truck stop, but the jittery energy only seemed to make the silence louder, the emptiness more oppressive. The road ahead was a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the Texas plains, with nothing but flat land as far as the eye could see. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 12:15 a.m. My GPS said I had another 4 hours before I could stop for the night, and I was more than ready for it. The freight I was hauling was due by morning, and I figured I'd make good time if I kept moving. But that nagging feeling in the back of my mind kept distracting me. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, the radio crackled. I hadn't touched the dial, and there were no other trucks in the area as far as I could tell. The static was faint at first, like a distant whisper, but then it grew louder, more insistent. I frowned and adjusted the volume, trying to clear up the signal, but it was no use. Then, through the white noise, a voice broke through, distorted but unmistakable. "Breaker 19, any truckers out there?" I froze. My hand hovered over the CB radio, unsure if I should respond. Something about the voice didn't sit right with me. It was flat, emotionless, like the person on the other end wasn't entirely human. "Breaker 19, any truckers out there?" The voice came again, louder this time, and more insistent. I felt a chill creep down my spine. I'd been a trucker long enough to know that sometimes you hear things on the CB late at night, especially in remote areas. People mess with each other, playing pranks, trying to spook drivers. But this didn't feel like a prank. There was something sinister in that voice, something that made my skin crawl. Against my better judgment, I picked up the mic. "This is Long Haul Hank. I copy. Who's on the line?" There was a long pause, the kind that stretches just a little too long, making you wish you hadn't spoken at all. Finally, the voice came back, but it was even more garbled now, almost unintelligible. "Careful on the road." Not alone. The static swallowed the voice before I could respond, and then the radio went dead. I stared at the CB, my heart pounding in my chest. Not alone. What the hell was that supposed to mean? I glanced in my rearview mirrors, half expecting to see another vehicle behind me, but the road was empty. I was alone, or at least, I thought I was. I shook my head, trying to dispel the growing sense of dread that had taken hold of me. It was just a glitch. The CB radios on these old rigs were notorious for picking up stray signals, especially in remote areas. That's all it was. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and pressed the pedal a little harder, eager to put more distance between myself and whatever that voice had been. The road stretched on, dark and desolate, and the only sounds were the rumble of the engine and the rhythmic thud of tires on asphalt. But my nerves were on edge now, Every shadow on the highway seemed to move in the corner of my eye, and every gust of wind sounded like a whisper just outside my window. An hour passed, maybe more, and the tension slowly began to drain from my shoulders. I hadn't heard any more strange transmissions, and the highway remained empty. I started to think maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, just a combination of exhaustion and too much coffee. I flicked on the radio, hoping some music would keep me awake, and leaned back in my seat, trying to relax. That's when I saw it. Up ahead, in the distance, there was a figure standing in the middle of the road. My heart skipped a beat, and I instinctively eased off the gas, squinting through the windshield. It was a man, or at least it looked like a man, standing motionless in the center of the lane, facing my truck. I hit the horn, a long, blaring blast that should have sent anyone running to the side of the road, but the figure didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me, or at least, I thought he was. I couldn't make out his face. My headlights only illuminated the silhouette of his body, tall and thin, with long arms that hung unnaturally at his sides. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt as the truck skidded to a stop just a few feet from the figure. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and for a moment, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the man in front of me. He was still standing there, motionless, his face obscured by shadow. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle. I didn't want to get out, but what if he needed help? Maybe he was in some kind of trouble. But then, why hadn't he moved? Why hadn't he gotten out of the way when he saw my truck barreling down on him? I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. Slowly, I reached for the flashlight I kept in the glove compartment and opened the door. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face, and I shivered as I stepped out of the cab, my boots crunching against the gravel on the side of the road. I shined the flashlight toward the figure, but as the beam of light hit the spot where he should have been standing, my blood ran cold. He was gone. I blinked, my heart racing. There was no one there. I swept the flashlight back and forth across the road, but it was empty. The man, if that's what he'd been, had vanished. I stood there for a moment, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined it? Was I so tired that my mind had conjured up a phantom in the middle of the road? I backed up slowly, keeping the flashlight trained on the spot where the figure had been, half expecting him to reappear. But the road remained empty. I climbed back into the truck, my hands shaking as I slammed the door shut and locked it. I didn't bother turning the radio back on. I didn't want to hear anything. I just wanted to get the hell off that road as fast as I could. I gunned the engine and sped down the highway, my eyes darting from the road ahead to the mirrors, half expecting to see the figure standing behind me in the middle of the road. But the rest of the drive was uneventful. No more voices on the CB, no more figures in the road. By the time the sun rose and I reached my destination, I'd almost convinced myself it had all been a hallucination, a result of too little sleep and too much caffeine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been out there that night. Something that had watched me, something that had wanted me to stop. I delivered the freight, signed the paperwork, and got back in my truck. I had another haul to make, but I took a detour, avoiding Route 81 altogether. I wasn't going to take any chances. That night, when I finally stopped at a truck stop to rest, I sat at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee. An older trucker, gray, bearded and weathered, sat down next to me. We made small talk for a while, sharing the usual stories of long hauls and bad weather. But when I mentioned Route 81, his expression darkened. "You seen him, haven't you?" he asked, his voice low. I frowned. "Seen who?" "The rider," he said, "the man in the road. He appears to some drivers, makes them stop. But not everyone who stops gets to keep driving." I stared at him, the memory of the figure in the road flashing in my mind. "What do you mean?" He leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "They say he's a ghost. Some poor soul who died out on that highway, hit by a truck just like yours. Now he haunts the road, trying to stop drivers, trying to get someone to take him with them. But once he's in your truck, you're never seen again." A chill ran down my spine. I didn't want to believe him, but deep down, I knew he was right. I'd seen the rider, and I'd been lucky. I finished my coffee, left a tip on the counter, and walked back to my truck. As I climbed into the cab, the road was long and lonely, stretching out beneath the weight of the dark Texas sky as I rumbled along in my truck. I was Eric Red Sullivan, a long-haul truck driver with over a decade on the road. I had seen it all: wild weather, the desolation of the open highways, and more strange encounters than I could count. But nothing could prepare me for what was about to happen on this fateful night. It had been a long week, and I was due for some rest. I had just picked up a last, minute delivery at a small warehouse outside of Amarillo and was heading to a drop-off point in New Mexico. The load was light, just a few crates filled with who knows what, but it had to be there by dawn. The promise of another paycheck was enough to keep me going. As I settled into my seat, the familiar hum of the engine was almost soothing. I pulled out onto the highway, the headlights slicing through the thick darkness, illuminating the asphalt ahead. The rhythmic thrum of the tires against the road was like a heartbeat, steady and comforting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the time of night, or the way the clouds hung low in the sky, blotting out the moon and stars. Or maybe it was the fact that I was the only one on the road. No other trucks, no cars. Just me and the endless stretch of highway that seemed to go on forever. As the hours slipped by, I tried to keep my mind occupied with the radio, but the static crackled ominously, punctuating the silence. I flipped through channels, hoping to find something to break the monotony. That's when I heard it. A faint voice on the CB radio. "Breaker 19, you got any truckers out there? Need to talk about the dark roads." I frowned, unsure if I should respond. It was late, and the tone of the voice sent a shiver down my spine. "This is Red, who's out there?" I finally said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Red, you there? Listen closely," the voice crackled back. "You gotta be careful out there. The shadows have teeth." I scoffed, half expecting it to be some sort of prank. "Shadows don't have teeth, buddy. You sure you're not just tired? Just keep your eyes open. Don't stop for anyone," the voice urged, then faded into static. A cold chill crept up my spine, but I shrugged it off, shaking my head. I'd heard plenty of tall tales in my time, but this felt different. I adjusted the volume on the radio, hoping to drown out the lingering unease. But the next few miles felt like a countdown, each one dragging me closer to an unknown destination. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a figure appeared on the side of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as I skidded to a halt just inches from the edge. My heart raced as I squinted into the darkness. It was a woman, standing there, shrouded in shadows. She looked disheveled, hair wild and clothes torn as if she had just come from some kind of struggle. "Help me," she shouted, her voice trembling with desperation. "Please." I hesitated, the earlier warning echoing in my mind. But as she stepped closer, the moonlight finally illuminated her face. Her eyes were wide with fear, glistening with tears, and I could see the desperation etched into her features. "Get in," I shouted, throwing open the passenger door. She jumped in, slamming the door behind her as if the darkness was chasing her. "Drive, just drive," she cried, and I didn't need to be told twice. I shifted back into gear and took off, the engine roaring to life as I pulled away from the side of the road. "Did you see him?" she asked, breathless. "See who?" I asked, glancing over at her. She was trembling, her eyes darting around the cab as if she expected someone to appear at any moment. "The man, the one who was following me? He's out there," she gasped. I frowned, trying to keep my focus on the road. "What do you mean? Did he attack you?" "Yes," she exclaimed, her voice rising in panic. "He came out of nowhere. I was hitchhiking, trying to get to my friend's house, and he grabbed me." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I didn't want to pry, but curiosity pushed me to ask, "What did he look like?" Her eyes went wide again, and she shook her head vigorously. "I don't know. It was dark, and he wore a hood. I could only see his eyes, and they were wrong, empty, like he wasn't human." A chill washed over me, the hairs on my neck standing on end. I stole another glance at her, and the reality of the situation started to sink in. I was driving a massive truck down an isolated highway with a woman who had just escaped something terrifying. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. "Laura," she replied, her voice shaking. "I don't know what's happening, but we need to get away from here." I nodded, trying to keep my eyes on the road ahead. I was still reeling from the encounter, but I couldn't let it show. Instead, I focused on the headlights illuminating the dark stretch of asphalt, each mile marker slipping by as I raced towards safety. "Where are you headed?" I asked, hoping to distract her from her panic. "Just anywhere but here," she said, her voice breaking. "I just want to get away from him." I could feel the weight of her fear pressing down on me, a palpable tension that hung thick in the air. I wanted to reassure her, to say everything would be fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As the miles dragged on, I glanced at the rearview mirror. The darkness swallowed the road behind us, but something felt off. I thought I saw movement, a shadow flickering in and out of sight. My heart raced as I tightened my grip on the wheel. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What?" Laura turned to look behind us, her expression shifting to fear. "There's something back there," I said, my pulse quickening. I think someone's following us." Her eyes widened, and I could see the panic rise again. "Go faster. We have to get away." I pressed down on the accelerator, the truck roaring to life as we sped down the empty highway. The shadows loomed around us, wrapping the truck in darkness. I glanced at the speedometer, 80 miles an hour, and we were still losing daylight. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed against the cab, and I nearly swerved off the road. "What was that?" I yelled. "I don't know." Laura screamed, her voice breaking. "Just keep going." The tension was suffocating, a thick fog that seemed to settle in the truck. My heart raced as I tried to focus on the road ahead. I couldn't let fear control me. But then I heard it again, a scratching sound, like nails dragging against metal, coming from the back of the truck. "What is that?" Laura shrieked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I shouted, trying to keep my eyes on the road. The noise grew louder, more insistent, echoing through the cab like a haunting whisper. "Stay calm. I'm sure it's just the load shifting." But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The sound was too frantic, too alive, as if something was clawing its way inside. I felt a surge of panic rising within me, and I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. Time was slipping away, and I had to get us off this highway before whatever was out there caught up. "Just keep going, don't stop," Laura urged, her hands gripping the seat as if it would save her from whatever terror was outside. I pressed down harder on the accelerator, pushing the truck to its limits. The landscape blurred past us, but the scratching continued, relentless and maddening. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as fear wrapped its icy fingers around my throat. Suddenly, I spotted a dim light up ahead, a gas station, its neon sign flickering in the darkness. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of dread. "I think we should stop," I said, glancing over at Laura. "We need to check out the truck." "No," she cried, her eyes wide with terror. "We can't. He'll find us." "Laura, we can't just keep driving like this. I need to see what's happening." I slowed down as we approached the gas station, and the truck shuddered to a halt. The scratching grew louder, a frantic sound echoing through the metal body. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "We can't stay in here," I said, glancing at the shadows that loomed outside. "We have to check the back of the truck." "No. Please, don't make me," she begged, her voice trembling. I reached for the door handle, determination coursing through me. "I have to. I'll be right back. Just stay here and keep the doors locked." I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as I made my way around to the back of the truck. The gas station's light cast eerie shadows across the pavement, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. The scratching grew louder, and I hesitated for a moment before gripping the latch and swinging the doors open. The sight inside made my stomach drop. The crates were toppled, some spilling their contents onto the floor, but that wasn't what made my blood run cold. Lurking in the shadows, a figure crouched low, half hidden behind the crates. It was the man Laura had described, the one with the hood. My breath caught in my throat as I realized his eyes were indeed empty, devoid of any humanity. He stared at me with an intensity that made me feel like prey in his gaze. "Get back in the truck," I shouted, my voice echoing in the stillness. But as I turned to run, the figure lunged at me, its movements impossibly quick. I barely had time to react as it slammed into me, knocking me to the ground. Pain shot through my body as I hit the asphalt, my vision spinning. I fought to push myself up, but the man was upon me, a hand closing around my throat. I struggled against his grip, gasping for breath as he leaned in closer, his breath foul and rancid. "You shouldn't have picked her up," he hissed, his voice low and sinister. With a surge of adrenaline, I managed to throw him off me, scrambling to my feet. "Laura," I screamed, looking back toward the truck. She was still inside, eyes wide with terror as she watched the scene unfold. I could hear her voice calling out, pleading for help. I turned back to the figure, my heart racing. There was no way I was letting him take her. I charged at him, adrenaline fueling my strength as I swung a fist at his face. But he dodged effortlessly, his movements fluid and unnatural. He laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You think you can protect her?" he taunted, his eyes narrowing as he lunged at me again. I dodged just in time, barely escaping his grasp as I stumbled backward, trying to find my footing. The truck loomed behind me, a sanctuary in the darkness, but I couldn't let him get to Laura. "Get out! Get out now!" I yelled at her. The figure lunged again, this time catching me by the collar of my shirt and dragging me toward the shadows. I kicked and struggled, but he was impossibly strong. Just as I thought I was done for, Laura burst from the truck, a wild look in her eyes. "Get away from him!" she screamed, brandishing a wrench she must have grabbed from the cab. With a swing, she struck the man across the face, and he stumbled back, momentarily stunned. "Now," I shouted, and we both dashed back toward the truck, adrenaline coursing through our veins. The man recovered quickly, his eyes flashing with fury as he lunged after us. We jumped inside, slamming the doors shut. I locked them, my heart pounding in my chest as I scrambled for the keys. Laura was shaking beside me, her eyes wide with fear. "Drive, drive," she shouted, her voice a frantic pitch. I turned the key in the ignition, praying the truck would start. It roared to life, and I slammed it into gear, flooring the accelerator. The tires screeched against the pavement as we tore away from the gas station, the figure receding into the darkness behind us. "Why would he come after me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, shaking my head. "Maybe you saw something you weren't supposed to." "I was just trying to get home," she cried. "I didn't do anything wrong. Listen, we're going to get you home." "I promise," I said, trying to reassure her as much as myself. We drove for another hour, the headlights cutting through the darkness as we searched for signs of civilization. But as the minutes stretched on, the fear clawing at my insides grew unbearable. "Look!" Laura suddenly shouted, pointing to a distant light flickering on the horizon. "A diner! We can stop there." I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope as we approached the glowing sign. It was an old-fashioned diner, neon lights buzzing softly, but it felt like a beacon of safety in the desolate night. I pulled into the parking lot, and we both stepped out of the truck, the night air cool against our skin. As we approached the diner, a sense of dread settled over me again. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't out of danger yet. Inside, the diner was nearly empty, the only customers a couple of truckers nursing their cups of coffee. The waitress, a kind-looking woman with tired eyes, greeted us as we walked in. "Welcome, folks. You hungry? Just coffee, please," I said, glancing around nervously. "And maybe some pie." Laura nodded, her expression still tight with fear. We slid into a booth, and I could feel the tension in the air as we sat in silence, the weight of our ordeal hanging between us. The waitress returned with our drinks, and I took a long sip, trying to calm my nerves. "You two look like you've been through hell," she said, concern etched on her face. I hesitated, unsure of how much to share. "Just a rough night on the road," I said finally. "Where are you headed?" she asked, glancing out the window. "New Mexico," I replied, but my eyes darted toward the entrance. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if the shadows outside were lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. The waitress nodded, her gaze flicking back to us. "Well, you're lucky to be here. You don't want to be caught out there after dark." "Not anymore." "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning forward. She hesitated, glancing around as if making sure no one else was listening. "There are stories, things that happen on those roads. People go missing, and not just the truckers. Laura shivered, and I felt my heart race. Like what? There's a man, they say he's a ghost. Comes for those who wander too far from the road, drags them into the dark. You should have seen the news last week. Another girl disappeared from the highway. We drove for what felt like an eternity. The only sound the roar of the engine and the pounding of our hearts. But as we sped down the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being hunted. Do you think he's gone? Laura asked, glancing nervously at the rearview mirror. I don't know, I admitted, my pulse racing. We just need to keep going. Get to the next town, find a police station or something. The landscape blurred past us, but the oppressive weight of fear lingered in the air. I could feel Laura's gaze on me, a mixture of fear and desperation. Why would he come after me? She asked, her voice trembling. I don't know, I said, shaking my head. Maybe you saw something you weren't supposed to. I was just trying to get home, she cried. I didn't do anything wrong. Listen, we're going to get you home. I promise, I said, trying to reassure her as much as myself. We drove for another hour, the headlights cutting through the darkness as we searched for signs of civilization. But as the minutes stretched on, the fear clawing at my insides grew unbearable. Look! Laura suddenly shouted, pointing to a distant light flickering on the horizon. A diner. We can stop there. I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope as we approached the glowing sign. It was an old-fashioned diner, neon lights buzzing softly, but it felt like a beacon of safety in the desolate night. I pulled into the parking lot, and we both stepped out of the truck, the night air cool against our skin. As we approached the diner, a sense of dread settled over me again. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't out of danger yet. Inside, the diner was nearly empty, the only customers a couple of truckers nursing their cups of coffee. The waitress, a kind-looking woman with tired eyes, greeted us as we walked in. Welcome, folks. You hungry? Just coffee, please, I said, glancing around nervously. And maybe some pie. Laura nodded, her expression still tight with fear. We slid into a booth, and I could feel the tension in the air as we sat in silence, the weight of our ordeal hanging between us. The waitress returned with our drinks, and I took a long sip, trying to calm my nerves. You two look like you've been through hell, she said, concern etched on her face. I hesitated, unsure of how much to share. Just a rough night on the road, I said finally. Where are you headed? She asked, glancing out the window. New Mexico, I replied, but my eyes darted toward the entrance. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if the shadows outside were lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. The waitress nodded, her gaze flicking back to us. Well, you're lucky to be here. You don't want to be caught out there after dark. Not anymore. What do you mean? I asked, leaning forward. She hesitated, glancing around as if making sure no one else was listening. There are stories, things that happen on those roads. People go missing, and not just the truckers. Laura shivered, and I felt my heart race. Like what? There's a man, they say he's a ghost. Comes for those who wander too far from the road, drags them into the dark. You should have seen the news last week. Another girl disappeared from the highway. My stomach dropped. Laura's face was pale as she turned to me, her eyes wide with fear. Is that what happened to me? The waitress nodded gravely. Could be. You're lucky you got away, but I wouldn't stay here long. If he's out there, he might still be looking for you. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. We couldn't stay here. Thank you for the coffee, I said abruptly, throwing some cash on the table. We have to go. The waitress's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to say something, but I turned and grabbed Laura's arm, leading her back outside. The cool night air hit us, and I glanced around, scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice low. "I don't know," she said, trembling slightly. "What if he's out there?" "We'll be fine," I assured her, but I felt a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. We jumped back into the truck, and I started the engine, heart pounding as I prepared to leave the diner behind. But just as I was about to pull out of the parking lot, a figure emerged from the shadows near the entrance. It was him. The man from the highway stood there, eyes glowing like embers in the dark. I felt my breath catch in my throat as he stepped closer, his expression twisted into a cruel smile. "Going somewhere?" he taunted, voice low and menacing. I slammed the truck into reverse, my heart racing as I tried to put distance between us. But he was faster than I anticipated, lunging toward the vehicle. I felt a jolt of terror as I hit the gas, pulling away from the diner. But not before I saw the look in his eyes: hunger, rage, and something deeper, something primal. "Drive, just go," Laura screamed, her voice snapping me back to reality. I took off down the highway, the lights of the diner fading into the distance. The road stretched ahead, but the shadows felt closer than ever. My heart raced as I fought against the fear gnawing at my insides. "What do we do?" Laura asked, her voice shaking. "We just need to keep driving," I said, my mind racing. "We'll find a safe place, a town. Anything." But as the miles flew by, the shadows began to shift around us, dark shapes flickering just out of reach. I could feel him out there, lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every sound made me jump, and Laura's quiet whimpers filled the air, a reminder of the terror we were both feeling. "Where are we?" she whispered, glancing out the window at the passing landscape. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we can't stop. Not yet." The headlights illuminated the dark road ahead, but the oppressive darkness surrounding us felt suffocating. The engine roared as I pressed the accelerator, desperate to put more distance between us and the figure from the diner. But the feeling of dread only grew, the shadows stretching and twisting as I drove. I could feel my grip tightening on the steering wheel, knuckles white with fear. "Do you think he's still following us?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I said, shaking my head. "But we can't let our guard down." We drove for what felt like hours, the endless road stretching before us. But in the distance, I finally spotted something, a flicker of light on the horizon. My heart leapt as I realized it was a small town, the warm glow of streetlights breaking the oppressive darkness. "There," I shouted, pointing. "A town." "Thank God," Laura breathed, her voice filled with relief. I pulled into the town, the streets lined with old buildings and the reassuring presence of life. We passed a few people walking along the sidewalk, and I felt a flicker of hope. We were safe. I parked in front of a small motel, the neon sign buzzing softly. "Let's get a room," I said, glancing at Laura. "Are you sure it's safe?" she asked, her eyes darting around. "I don't know, but we need to stop and regroup," I replied. "Just for a little while." We hurried inside, and I approached the front desk. An older man looked up, surprise etched on his face. "Evening, folks. What can I do for you?" "Room for the night, please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sure thing," he said, quickly processing my request. "It'll be $50. I pulled out my wallet, handing him cash as my heart raced. I could feel Laura's anxiety beside me, and I turned to her, trying to reassure her. It's going to be okay. Here's your key, the man said, handing it over. Room 3, just down the hall. I took the key, nodding in thanks before leading Laura down the dimly lit hallway. Each step felt heavy, as if the weight of the night was pressing down on us. When we reached the door, I unlocked it and pushed it open, the musty air greeting us. It was a small room with 2 beds, a flickering lamp, and a tiny bathroom in the corner. I locked the door behind us, breathing a sigh of relief. We're safe, I said, trying to convince both of us. Laura flopped down on the bed, her shoulders slumping in exhaustion. I can't believe this is happening, she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. I sat beside her, feeling the weight of the night settle around us. We're going to be okay, I assured her. We'll figure this out in the morning. But as I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The shadows felt alive, creeping in on us, suffocating in their presence. Do you think he knows where we are? Laura asked, her voice trembling. I don't know, I said, glancing at the window. The streetlights outside flickered, casting strange shadows in the room. But we can't let our guard down. We need to stay vigilant. As the night dragged on, I found it hard to sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of the figure, the dark presence lurking outside. I could hear Laura's soft breaths beside me, a reminder that she was still here, still with me. Hours passed, and I finally drifted off, but it felt like I barely closed my eyes before a loud bang jolted me awake. My heart raced as I shot up, scanning the room. Did you hear that? I whispered to Laura, but she was still fast asleep. I listened intently, straining to hear any sound. The room felt cold, the air thick with tension. Then I heard it again, a soft scratching sound, coming from the window. Fear gripped me as I got up, inching toward the window. I peered through the curtain, but there was nothing there, just the empty street bathed in the glow of the streetlights. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the fear crawling up my spine. It was just my imagination, I told myself. But as I lay back down, the scratching continued, a relentless reminder that we were not safe. I turned to Laura, her face peaceful in sleep, and felt a surge of protectiveness. I couldn't let anything happen to her. I wouldn't allow it. The night wore on, and I lay there, wide awake, every creak of the building sending my heart into overdrive. Just when I thought I might finally drift off, there was another bang, louder this time. I shot up, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I turned to Laura. Wake up, I hissed, shaking her gently. We need to go. Now, what? Why? She mumbled, blinking in confusion. I heard something. We can't stay here, I said, my voice urgent. She sat up, panic creeping into her eyes. What do you mean? There's something out there, I said, glancing at the window again. I don't know what it is, but I can't shake this feeling that we're not alone. Laura nodded, her face pale as she scrambled to get dressed. I threw on my clothes, my heart racing as I glanced at the door. We had to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. Once we were both dressed, I checked the time. It was just past 2 a.m. The town was shrouded in darkness, the only sound the wind rustling outside. Let's get out of here, I said, heading to the door. Wait, Laura said, grabbing my arm. What if he's out there? We'll take our chances, I replied, opening the door just a crack. I peered into the hallway, the shadows clinging to the corners. It felt empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. I opened the door wider and stepped out, glancing back at Laura, who followed closely behind. We moved quietly down the hallway, each step echoing in the silence. I led the way to the exit, my heart pounding with every sound. When we reached the front door, I glanced back one last time, fear gnawing at my insides. Outside, the night was still, but the feeling of dread was palpable. The shadows loomed large, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "We need to get to the truck," I said, glancing around. We hurried across the parking lot, but just as we reached the truck, a loud crash echoed through the night. My heart dropped as I spun around, my breath caught in my throat. There, in the distance, the figure stood, illuminated by the flickering streetlight. He grinned, a twisted smile that sent shivers down my spine. "You can't run from me," he taunted, his voice echoing in the stillness. I felt Laura freeze beside me, fear radiating off her. "What do we do?" she whispered, panic lacing her words. "Get in the truck," I shouted, scrambling for the door. We jumped inside, and I slammed the door shut, locking it as quickly as I could. I fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking as I tried to start the engine. "Go, go," Laura screamed, her eyes wide with terror. I turned the key, but the engine sputtered, refusing to start. "Come on," I shouted, frustration boiling over as I tried again. The figure was getting closer, moving with an unnatural speed, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. I felt a wave of panic wash over me as I tried once more, praying it would work. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I slammed it into gear, my foot pressing down on the accelerator. The truck surged forward, but the figure lunged, barely missing my side mirror. "Drive," Laura yelled, clutching the dashboard. I pushed the gas pedal to the floor, tires screeching as we tore away from the motel, the figure disappearing into the shadows behind us. We sped down the highway, the night air rushing past us, but I could still feel the weight of his presence lurking in the darkness. "Where do we go now?" Laura asked, her voice trembling. "We just need to keep moving," I replied, trying to sound confident, but the fear was palpable, crawling under my skin as we drove into the night. The headlights cut through the dark, but every shadow felt like a threat, every sound made my heart race. After what felt like hours of driving, we finally spotted the lights of another small town in the distance. Relief washed over me as I pulled into the parking lot of a diner, heart racing. "Let's go inside," I said, glancing at Laura. We climbed out of the truck, the cool air hitting us as we hurried inside. The diner was small but welcoming, the smell of coffee and breakfast filling the air. The waitress smiled at us, concern flickering in her eyes. "You two okay?" "We just need a place to sit," I said, my voice shaky. She nodded and led us to a booth, handing us menus. I glanced around, still feeling the weight of what had just happened. "Do you think he followed us?" Laura asked, her hands trembling as she clutched the menu. "I don't know," I said, trying to stay calm. "But we'll be okay here. We can figure out what to do next." We ordered coffee, my hands shaking as I held the cup. The warmth was comforting, but my mind raced with thoughts of the figure. "Why did he target us?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied, looking into her eyes. "But we're going to get through this together. I promise." Just then, the door to the diner swung open, and my heart dropped. There he was, the figure from the motel, standing in the doorway, grinning that twisted smile. I froze, and the waitress's eyes widened in shock. "Oh my God," she whispered, backing away. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Laura's hand as we bolted for the door. But the figure was already moving, his eyes locked on us. We dashed outside, adrenaline fueling our every move as we sprinted back to the truck. "Get in," I yelled, fumbling with the keys as I glanced back. He was gaining on us, but I finally got the door open and we jumped inside, slamming the door shut. I turned the key, praying the engine would start. It roared to life, and I slammed it into gear, tires screeching as we sped away from the diner, the figure fading into the darkness behind us. "Where do we go?" Laura gasped, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know," I said, my heart racing. "Just keep your head down." As we drove into the night, the fear was still there, clawing at my insides. But I knew we had to keep moving, to find a way to escape the nightmare that was chasing us. Little did we know, the real horror was just beginning. The faint glow of dawn struggled to break through the dense forest canopy as I drove my delivery truck along the winding dirt road. I was a long-haul trucker, making my way from one small town to another, delivering packages to rural businesses that depended on our service. This morning felt different, though. There was an uneasy stillness in the air, and the feeling of being watched sent chills down my spine. I could hear the tires crunching against the gravel, the sound echoing in the otherwise quiet landscape. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the feeling as paranoia. After all, I had been driving for years, and I knew the job came with its own set of eerie experiences, especially at night. But this morning, with the mist swirling around the trees and the rising sun barely lighting the path ahead, my instincts were on high alert. Pulling into the small roadside diner, I hoped to grab some coffee and breakfast to fuel me for the long journey ahead. The "Welcome to Marley's Diner" sign creaked as I stepped out, the wooden structure looking like it had been there for decades. The scent of bacon wafted through the air as I pushed open the door, the bell above jingling cheerfully. Inside, the diner was filled with the warm glow of yellowed light. A few patrons occupied booths, their conversations hushed as if they were sharing secrets. I took a seat at the counter, and the waitress, a middle-aged woman with a kind smile and hair tied back in a messy bun, approached me. "What can I get for you, hon?" she asked, her voice warm and inviting. "Just a coffee and whatever's good," I replied, trying to shake off the lingering unease. "Coming right up," she said before bustling off to the kitchen. As I waited for my order, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I glanced around the diner, noticing that the conversations had quieted. The patrons were now looking toward the window, their expressions a mix of curiosity and fear. I turned to see what they were staring at, my heart pounding. Outside, a figure stood at the edge of the tree line, half hidden in the shadows. It was tall and lanky, its silhouette distorted by the morning light. The figure seemed to be watching the diner, its head cocked slightly, almost as if it were studying the people inside. "Who is that?" I asked the waitress as she returned with my coffee. She followed my gaze, and her expression shifted to one of concern. "That's Old Man Wilson. He's been wandering the woods ever since his son went missing a few years back." "What happened to his son?" I asked, intrigued despite myself. "They say he was taken by a creature," she whispered, lowering her voice as if afraid to say it too loudly. "A dogman. They say it's a local legend, but Old Man Wilson believes it with all his heart. He says the creature is still out there, watching and waiting." I felt a chill creep down my spine as I sipped my coffee. The bitter taste did little to warm me, and the unease I had felt earlier returned with a vengeance. I glanced back outside, but the figure was gone. "Is he dangerous?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. She shook her head. "No, not him. But they say the dogman is. You'd do best to stay clear of the woods after dark. Strange things happen out there." I nodded, trying to mask the growing anxiety in my chest. I paid my bill, thanked the waitress, and stepped back outside, the cool morning air hitting my face. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that clung to me. As I climbed back into my truck, I couldn't help but glance back toward the tree line, half expecting to see Old Man Wilson standing there again. But the woods were quiet, the trees standing like silent sentinels. I started the engine, the rumble drowning out the silence. The truck rolled back onto the dirt road, and I quickly fell into a rhythm, focusing on the task ahead. But the fear lingered, a gnawing doubt that I couldn't shake off. A few hours into my drive, the sun was fully up, casting long shadows along the road. I was passing through a stretch of forest when I heard it, a low, guttural growl resonating from somewhere nearby. My heart raced, and I strained to listen, but the sound was gone as quickly as it had come. Just the woods, I told myself, gripping the steering wheel tightly. But I couldn't help glancing in the side mirror, half expecting to see something following me. Suddenly, I spotted movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned to see a large, dark figure darting between the trees. My breath caught in my throat, and I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop. I stared into the forest, my heart pounding in my chest. There it was again, a glimpse of fur, a flash of eyes reflecting the sunlight. I couldn't tell if it was a trick of my mind, but fear surged through me, and I fumbled for my phone, considering whether I should call someone. Before I could think clearly, the figure reappeared, this time much closer. It was enormous, standing on all fours, with a canine-like head and a muscular body covered in dark fur. My mind raced with the stories I had heard, the local legends of the dogman. I slammed the truck into reverse, my instincts screaming at me to get away. The creature was moving toward the road, its eyes locked on me with an unsettling intelligence. I could feel the weight of its gaze, as if it were sizing me up, deciding whether I was a threat or prey. I hit the gas, my truck lurching backward before I spun the wheel, turning to speed away. The forest blurred past me, the trees becoming a dark wall as I drove faster and faster, the growling echoing in my mind. Suddenly, I heard a loud thump against the side of my truck, causing me to swerve. My heart raced as I glanced out the window, but there was nothing there. I could feel a cold sweat breaking out across my skin as I fought to regain control. I drove like a madman, the adrenaline coursing through my veins, pushing me to put as much distance between myself and the creature as possible. My mind raced with fear and confusion. Was it real? Did I really see that? I didn't stop until I reached a small gas station, the place barely more than a shack with a few pumps outside. I jumped out of my truck, my legs shaking, and rushed inside, the bell jingling as I entered. The clerk looked up from behind the counter, eyes widening at my disheveled state. "You all right, buddy?" I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "I think I saw something out there. In the woods." "Yeah, you mean the dogman?" he asked, a smirk creeping across his face. "Old Man Wilson says he's been out there for years. People have been disappearing, you know. Is it real?" I pressed, my voice tinged with urgency. He shrugged. "Could be. Or just stories to keep people out of the woods. But if I were you, I wouldn't go back out there after dark." I nodded, the clerk's casual demeanor doing little to ease my nerves. I filled my truck with gas, keeping a wary eye on the tree line, expecting to see the creature lurking just beyond the shadows. Once I was back on the road, I couldn't shake the fear that clung to me. The shadows in the forest felt alive, closing in with every mile. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, the light fading and giving way to dusk. Panic clawed at me as I drove, the winding road stretching ahead like a dark tunnel. I had about 2 hours until my next stop, but as I drove deeper into the woods, the unease grew. I was exhausted, the adrenaline from the encounter leaving me drained, but I knew I couldn't stop now. Just as I rounded a bend, my headlights caught something up ahead. My stomach dropped as I recognized the figure. Old Man Wilson stood in the middle of the road, his eyes wide and unfocused. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as I skidded to a stop just inches from him. "What are you doing?" I yelled, my heart racing. He didn't respond, just stood there, staring at me as if he didn't even see my truck. I leaned out of the window, trying to get his attention. "Get out of the road." Suddenly, he raised his hand, pointing toward the woods. "It's coming. You need to leave. It's coming for you." Panic surged through me as I felt a chill in the air. I glanced toward the trees, my heart pounding as I saw movement among the shadows. "Get in," I shouted, throwing open the passenger door. "You need to get in." He hesitated for a moment before stumbling toward my truck, his face pale and drawn. I could see the fear in his eyes, the wild look that told me he believed every word he was saying. He climbed in, slamming the door behind him. "Drive now," he yelled, his voice cracking with urgency. I didn't need to be told twice. I hit the gas, the truck roaring to life as I sped down the road, my heart racing. "What's out there?" I demanded, glancing at him. "The dogman," he panted, gripping the seat tightly. "It's been hunting me for years. I thought I could keep it away, but it's too strong." "What do you mean?" I pressed, trying to keep my eyes on the road. He shook his head, looking pale and shaken. "It's not just a creature. It's a spirit, a curse. It feeds on fear and darkness. You can't run from it. You have to confront it." "I don't want to confront anything," I yelled, my voice rising in panic. "I just want to survive." His eyes widened as he pointed back toward the trees. "It's right behind us." I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart dropping as I saw a dark shape darting through the woods, moving with impossible speed. "Faster," he urged, panic lacing his voice. "We need to get out of here." I pressed down harder on the gas pedal, the truck speeding forward as I fought to keep my focus on the road. But the feeling of being watched intensified, a cold weight pressing down on my chest. Just then, the headlights caught a flash of movement, and I saw it, a massive, hulking figure, its eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. The dogman stood at the edge of the road, watching us with an intelligence that sent chills racing through my body. "Don't look at it," Old Man Wilson shouted, his voice rising in desperation. I forced my gaze back to the road, my heart pounding in my ears. "What do we do?" I screamed, my panic spiraling. "Drive, just keep driving. We need to find a place to hide." I could feel the weight of its gaze upon us, the creature moving with unnatural speed, keeping pace with the truck as if it were toying with us. The growling echoed in my ears, a low, menacing sound that rattled my bones. Suddenly, the road began to narrow, and I spotted a turnoff leading deeper into the woods. "There!" I shouted, veering off the main road and onto the dirt path. Old Man Wilson looked at me, fear etched on his face. "What are you doing? It's not safe here." "I don't care. We have to hide," I yelled, pushing the truck deeper into the trees. The shadows closed around us as I found a small clearing and slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop. I turned off the engine, my breath coming in rapid gasps. "We can't stay here," he urged, glancing nervously at the trees. "It will find us." I could feel the terror radiating from him, and I fought to calm myself, trying to think clearly. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice shaky. "We have to confront it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's the only way." I shook my head, fear gripping me. "I can't face that thing. I just want to survive." He turned to me, his eyes filled with a wild determination. "You have to. It feeds on fear. If you show it you're not afraid, it will lose its power over you." I wanted to argue, but I could see the truth in his eyes. Deep down, I knew I couldn't keep running. I had to stand my ground. "All right," I said, my voice steadying. "What do we do?" "We wait," he replied, gripping the edge of his seat. "And when it comes, we stand together." The darkness around us felt alive, the weight of the woods pressing in. I could hear the distant sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of the wind. My heart raced as I waited, the tension thick in the air. Minutes felt like hours as we sat in silence, the shadows growing darker around us. I could feel the presence of the dogman lurking just beyond the trees, its eyes watching, waiting for the moment to strike. And then, I heard it, the low growl echoing through the clearing, sending shivers down my spine. I exchanged a glance with Old Man Wilson, the fear palpable between us. "Remember, don't show fear," he whispered, his voice steady. As the growl grew louder, I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature emerged from the trees, a massive shadow with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. "Stay calm," Old Man Wilson urged, his voice a soft whisper. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus on the creature as it stepped closer, its growl vibrating through the air. I could feel the fear creeping up my spine, but I fought against it, forcing myself to stand firm. The dogman stood before us, its form enormous and imposing, muscles rippling under its dark fur. It stared at us with an intelligence that sent a chill down my spine. I felt a surge of defiance rising within me. "I'm not afraid of you," I shouted, my voice steady. The creature paused, tilting its head as if considering my words. "We're not afraid," Old Man Wilson shouted beside me, his voice breaking through the tension. The dogman let out a deafening roar, a sound that rattled the windows of the truck, but I held my ground, refusing to back down. The creature stepped closer, its eyes locking onto mine. For a moment, I felt a connection, a strange understanding that transcended fear. It was a creature of darkness, a guardian of the woods, but it thrived on fear. As I stared into its eyes, I felt the weight of the world lift from my shoulders. I was no longer afraid. I was ready to confront whatever it was that had haunted these woods. The growl faded, replaced by an eerie silence. The dogman stood before us, no longer a creature of nightmares, but a force of nature, a being that existed outside of our understanding. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature turned and retreated back into the woods, disappearing into the shadows. Old Man Wilson and I sat in silence, our breath coming in heavy gasps. "Did it work?" I asked, my voice trembling. He nodded, a look of relief washing over his face. "You faced it. You showed it your strength." As the sun began to rise, casting golden light through the trees, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The forest no longer felt threatening. We made our way back to the road, the weight of the encounter lingering in our minds. I knew the experience would stay with me forever, a reminder of the power of fear and the strength that lies within. As I drove away from the forest, the sun shining brightly ahead, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had faced something extraordinary. I glanced at Old Man Wilson, who was staring out the window, lost in thought. "Thank you," I said quietly, breaking the silence. He looked at me, a small smile creeping onto his face. "You did well, kid. You faced your fear, and that's more than most can do." As I drove on, I felt a newfound sense of determination coursing through me. I was no longer just a trucker making deliveries. I was a survivor, someone who had faced the darkness and emerged stronger on the other side. The road stretched out before me, and I knew that whatever lay ahead, I could handle it. The dogmen might still roam the woods, but I was no longer afraid of the shadows that lurked in the night.